It is my privilege and joy to continue our study in the book of Acts. Today we open a page that is not so pleasant, but it is full of learning and understanding. It's the arrest of Paul in Jerusalem. Can a servant of God go and preach the gospel even though in bonds? God proves it that Paul was still preaching the gospel even in bonds. But now he had the occasion to preach it not only to humans that were free and around him, but as one in bonds, he could preach the gospel to kings and even to Caesar, where he came to Rome. He was the one that used the means that God gave him, and he did everything he could, even as a prisoner. But how did he become a prisoner? Let's read from verse 17 in Acts 21. And when we were come to Jerusalem, the brethren received us gladly. And the day following, Paul went in with us unto James, and all the elders were present. And when he had saluted them, he declared particularly what things God had wrought among the Gentiles by his ministry. And when they heard it, they glorified the Lord and said unto him, Thou seest, brother, how many thousands of Jews there are which believe, and they are all zealous of the law. And they are informed of thee that thou teachest all the Jews which are among the Gentiles to forsake Moses, saying that they ought not to circumcise their children, neither to walk after the customs. What is it, therefore? The multitude must needs come together, for they will hear that thou art come. Do therefore this, that we say to thee. So, this is the story that leads to his arrest and his prisonership. Paul goes immediately to James and the leading brethren, and he reports them all that what God has done among the Gentiles. And he hands over the alms, the money that he collected for the poor church in Jerusalem. Of course, all praise God over the reports of Paul and are happy. But they have a but. And now they come up and say, well, but see, here in Jerusalem, a great work has been done. Thousands of Jews have been converted. But all Jews are eager over the law. And they will come together. They have some rumors about you circulating that you are saying to the people in the diaspora, they have not to circumcise anymore their children, and they have to leave the customs aside. This they brought up before Paul. And we must remember that just a few months before Paul came to Jerusalem, he wrote the epistle to the Galatians. In Corinth, he wrote that epistle, and we remember how strong a language he uses in this epistle. He says, if I would be serving a man, I would not be a servant of God. But he wrote that epistle to his children, like he said, to those that he has brought to the church. He wrote it as an authority to them. But now he is here under the authority of the church. And amazingly, that what he was so firmly preaching to those that he brought to, he now gets intimidated, I would say. He doesn't justify himself, we don't hear, but he listens to the things that the leaders of the church propose to him. You see, the church leaders, they want the good. They want to have no rumors. They want to have peace among the brethren. They want to have unity. And now here comes the one that preaches a straight gospel, and they are not agreeing with it. But is the church of Christ divided in two groups? Are the Jewish under one certain things to do, and are the heathen under other ones? Imagine to have two classes of people in a church. Oh, I am Jewish. Oh, that you're circumcised. That's fine. And you go on with the customs. I am heathen, so that's fine. I don't need to be circumcised. We all get to heaven together the same. We understand that doesn't work. But that's how it was. The first church, the gospel didn't penetrate to the leaders until, I say so, the bottom. They just went along a way, but then they lost their first love, as Jesus says in Revelation 3. They lost their first love, and losing their first love means that you go after humans. You go after what the big society says. Look, many thousands of Jews are here. And how come? We must please them. We must make something that you, Paul, get justified by what you do. So they want to justify Paul, but it's not really that they want to justify Paul, because they also were among them people that believed they had to keep the circumcision and the customs. It was so hard for Christ to remove from the minds of his disciples that he must die to be the Messiah. And he couldn't do it until it happened. They didn't hear it. He said it several times. He tried to take away their pride by saying, don't search to be first in the kingdom of heaven. And here it is, just before the Passover, the last Passover. They strive each other who wants to be the first. What a terrible thing. But Christ didn't get discouraged. He didn't get discouraged with Ephesus, the church, the first church here, because they were doing what they could, but they didn't go far enough. And unfortunately, they proposed to Paul something that was totally nonsense. We will never please the people while doing compromise. And Paul follows the instruction of the leading brethren, even though he wrote that strong epistle to the Galatians. And the rest is history. It was in God's plan that when we do mistakes, He must show the result of it. That's how disease comes. It is not a punishment. It shows the result of trusting in man. And all this is because it is dependency on humans. The leaders make themselves dependent on the multitudes. Today we like multitudes, and many people, when a rich person comes into the church, he just gets a lot of influence because we like them. We think then they sustain the church and then it will all be better. It's just dependency on humans. And Paul fall into the same pit that he said, how can I say the leading brethren that they're wrong? How can I stand? And he should have not said what is wrong. He should have just said, I don't need to justify. I just give you to read the epistle to the Galatians and then convince yourself. But unfortunately, he fell. And while being there in his prison that night, after they caught him and he was spared his life, he was in guilt. He was in thinking what he has done wrong. And the Lord just came to him and encouraged him and says, you still will be in front of Rome. You will go to Rome. But of course, Paul didn't know how he will get to Rome. And God, in spite of what their wrong decision was, did not forsake neither the leader nor his servant. But there were things, there were consequences to be bared. And those consequences hit the church prosperity, the advancing of the gospel. It was a consequence there. Like God gives us consequence for what we do wrong so that we can see the wrong. So creature dependency is the foundation of every imprisonment. Everything has just one root. And if we understand that in this lecture today, we might be advancing fast in the work of the gospel. Lucifer trusts in himself. He's the one that first trusts in a creature. He makes himself dependent on himself. Why he cannot be dependent on himself? He stops taking from God. Lucifer goes, and the fallen angels that follow him, they take their trust from God away and trust in Lucifer. Eve trusts the serpent. Adam trusts his wife. Abraham trusts his wife. He trusts the Egyptian Pharaoh because he says, my wife is my sister. And so here he shows that he has not faith in God, but has trust in humans, in human authorities. But God spared him. He spared his wife from being the wife of the Pharaoh. And he does this twice with another king. So Abraham had to learn the lesson of faith. Because when he went out from Ur in Chaldea, his faith was in a certain level, but when God brings him down the road, he must bring us in difficulties to see whom we trust into. And it's always, and I am so absolute in this thing, it is always the trust in the wrong source, the trust in humans that brings all imprisonment and everything in our life. Isaac didn't trust in God when he said at his birth that the younger will serve the older. He trusted his son and he was deceived. Jacob didn't trust God that God will make him the heir if he wasn't. He could have said, Lord, it's your business. But no, he trusts his mom because his mom comes with the good idea that we can betray father. He doesn't see so well, so you do something. It is the trust in humans, to not trust in God, that brought Jacob into his problems. And yes, he grows up. Did God forsake him? No. The first night when he flees, God appears to him and says, I am with you, that you should not lose your faith. Friends, then we have Moses, the great man who learns to trust God in the desert for 40 years. And then he takes this stubborn people and he leads it for 40 years and he makes no mistakes. But there is one thing at the end to crown his victory. God allows him to get into a last temptation. And Moses trusts the people. Oh, the failure of Moses is one of the greatest, for me, the greatest examples that how easy a person can fall to put his trust in a human, even though for years he was trusting God only. And this is what we must overcome if we want to be among those that will have the faith of Jesus totally. We must be the one that stand with Christ on the Mount Zion, and they have full patience. Moses lost his patience. Why? Because he trusted the people. The law was broken when you trust a human, and the faith is not the faith of Christ. But this have it all. They show that whatever circumstances, they don't lose their patience. They keep the commandment because that keeps them. And the faith of Jesus is their own faith. It's a faith that came to its full function, because it's only when it's in full function you keep the commandment. Before, you break them. And here is Moses. Does God forgive him? Yes, God forgive him. But is there consequence? Yes, there is consequence. It's the consequence like for us, disease. It's not that God doesn't punish us, but he wants to show us the problem. That's why there was a consequence for the church in Jerusalem. There was a consequence for Paul. There was a consequence for Moses that he fell, even though they were forgiven and God was with them. There was a consequence with Jacob, and there was a consequence with Elijah. Elijah, the great man of God, he went up and prayed the prayer, and it didn't rain for 3.5 years. And then he prayed, and his face was tried, and he prayed 7 times until the first cloud appeared on the sky, and he knew it will rain. And then there comes a news to him that Jezebel says, I will destroy you by tomorrow night. And what does this great man of God? He loses his faith. He just runs in front of a woman. Isn't it a terrible thing? Did God forsake his servant? Of course not. Elijah is also great encouragement for me. But I don't want to make his mistake. I don't want to make the mistake of Moses. Why was it written for us? That we should overcome. Elijah overcame. God was merciful to him. But that great reformation that God planned with those 7,000 that he had still there that didn't bow their knees was not fulfilled. And so God had to make another way to still reach to that point where he wanted to come. You see, what's the vulnerability of the human is his faith and trust in God. If Elijah would have been faithful, a great reformation and the history would have been changed. But unfortunately, if their captain failed, who shall bring the other ones forward? But God was merciful. Peter in Galatia, where Paul reproves him and says, you do wrong going after humans. And we could go on for many, many others. We could see that that's wrong. We could take also those people who didn't take their chance to become faithful. It was Pilate. It was his human dependency that brought him to not take Christ and be saved. It was his weak character of trusting in man. It was the character of the other leaders, Felix and Augustus and even Nero, when Paul preaches to him the gospel. It is the bondage of human dependencies that keeps them into their imprisonment and proves their final destruction. There are only 2 sources of trust from where a human can take. There is the source that is God, and if we take through trusting is the only way to take from somewhere, from God, then decision is giving. So every decision comes of in whom I trust. All our decisions are free, but our trust is always dependency, because we must take from outside our orientation and we give it then to the world and to the people around us. This is the law of God. This is as simple as it can be. And the alternative is to trust humans, to take away your trust from God and trust humans. Now, we all were born in a situation where we don't trust God, where we trust humans. And we must come back to that situation to trust God only and not trust humans anymore. So here are the leaders of the church. Here is Paul. And instead of trusting God, they have their trust in leaders. And God had to show them through the consequences that what they have done was wrong. We have only these two things. The law can never be broken in another place than where you trust on, from whom you take. And we must understand, we must take from God only. That's our only salvation. And Jesus was the man that only trusted God. He never trusted a human. He never searched the honor of men. He says in John 5, I do not search the honor of man. And his disciples were wondering, why did he not search to be more among the leaders, or among the rich people, or among the priests, or among those recognized as authorities? Why did he want to please them? Why did he want to go under their skin just to get their approval? If Jesus would have done that, he would have sinned. You see, it looks like here, when Paul and the church leaders say to him something, that does not look bad. What was it? Was it is there any perception or a prescript in the 10 Commandments to not go and have a vow and do some sacrifice? Does it say in those precepts you should not give an advice to just please people? Well, it says, it doesn't say it in these words, but it's very clear there. If we would have understood the law, we would have known for sure that it is just in whom we trust. And the church leaders and Paul, they break the 10 Commandments. They break the fundamental law of whom you take from. But you see, the works that they didn't look bad. This is why it is so subtle. When we do out from our decisions the bad things, it's obvious that we don't take from God. But when you don't do those things that are obviously wrong, how can you know that he does it out of not trusting in God or trusting God? Here there is a battle. Here we must know ourselves exactly in whom we trust. If we don't know that, how can we ever advance in our life? Because our works might not look bad, but they still come and might come from trusting in humans. That's why the battle is one of faith. And if the devil can fool us by proposing to us good things to do out of trusting a human, pleasing men around us, then he gains the victory. Oh, friends, the great people of God, as we have seen, have fallen in this place, because only in this place you can fall. That's why the rich young ruler could say, I have kept the whole commandments. But in reality, he didn't keep none of them, because he was not trusting in God. He was taking from humans. But he was not even aware of it. What did he do wrong? He did not commit adultery. He did not steal. He did not covet, because he had all of this. He did not lie, and he honored his parents. What was wrong in him? It was all wrong in him, because he trusted in his means that he thought they come from him. It is trusting in humans that destroys everything. And here Christ had the victory. He was tempted in the positive and in the negative, and in none of them he failed. He was tempted, of course, very strong when he was beaten and when he was rejected by his nation. But he was tempted also during his daily work. After whom shall I go? And when his disciples came on and said, you made the priests and rulers angry. They saw that the work of Jesus made them angry. And then what did Jesus reply? He says, well, not every tree that is planted, God has planted in the garden. So Jesus was not impressed while they were angry. He was not impressed when they didn't accept him and left him 5,000 in one day and also the 70. He was not moved by it because his trust was in God. He never ran after one human being. Will we ever learn the lesson? In whom shall we trust? That is the question. That's why our work might look good, but they might be very, very wrong because the trust is not in God. That's why temptation is so subtle. That's why things are not so obvious like they are. And if I would be the devil, I would tempt the people to do the right things. I would give them to eat the right food. I would just propose to them to do the right natural treatments, but I would never show them that they have their disease because they trust in humans. That I would cover. I would just put aside. I would never put people to do the wrong. I would just put them to do the right thing out of the wrong motivation, out of the wrong taking the wrong trust. Do we preach the gospel and do we want people to be healed from their physical disease? Is that the purpose of medical missionary work? Of course not. The purpose of the medical missionary work is to uncover in whom we trust. That's the purpose, so that people can see that their consequences, their disease, is from something good they want to enforce on others, that they might understand what is the problem. That's why we are medical missionaries. We do not want people to be healthy. We want people to understand their inner heart, to see on disease, to see on their life that they are dependent. And if health is your goal in life, then you're wrong. Health is just a means, it's not a goal. Health is something that we should have that we might work better. But we don't want to be healthy for the purpose to be healthy, but because we want to serve God clearly. In Jeremiah 17, we have the conclusion of all things. Blessed is the man that trusted in the Lord and whose hope the Lord is. For he shall be as a tree planted by the waters, and that spreadeth out her roots by the river, and shall not see when heat cometh, but her leaf shall be green, and shall not be careful in the year of drought, neither shall cease from yielding fruit. Thus says the Lord, cursed be the man that trusted in man and maketh flesh his arm, and whose heart departeth from the Lord. The heart can only depart from the Lord while not trusting him. That's the only bondage. The heart can only be bound to trust. And that binding, if that binding is wrong, everything that we do is wrong. Everything else is just in the circle, is the effect of our binding. For he shall be like the heat in the desert, and shall not see when good cometh, but shall inhabit the parched places in the wilderness, in a salt land, and not inhabited. So here is the blessing and the curse. So whom do you want to trust? Do you think it's easy? Do you think it will be easy to see in whom you trust? You see, that's a great battle. Thanks God that he brings us in difficulties, where our trust in humans come up. Thank God that we have people around us that disappoint us, that show that when we trusted them, it was wrong. And every disappointment that the person brings to you means that God has a plan to liberate you, to make you free from trusting a human. There is no trust in humans. We never trust our spouses. We only trust God and work with our spouses. We never trust the church leaders. We just work with the church leaders in trusting God. We do not follow people because we trust them. We follow people because we trust God, because we know that he sends us to do that and not. We must give responsibility in front of God alone. We must stand on our own feet. We must be clear. We cannot say, oh Lord, maybe the leaders have suggested this to me, that's why I did it. No. We must go by principle. We must never do a compromise. Because the compromise for the good is the most devilish temptation. To want peace, to want unity by sacrificing trust, the trust in God, that is sin. That's the original. That we must overcome. And will it be easy? No, it will not. That's why those who trust in God and will have encounters with the leaders or members, they don't go against them. They don't respond to accusation. They don't respond to rumors. I never responded to rumors and accusation because when you're accused, you're judged. Ever Jesus answered to them, so we only answer to those in authority, like Jesus did also in his trial. And I want to answer when I'm asked, but I don't want to do the will of a human. I only do that what someone suggests if I understand it's the will of God. So do we need to go to correct the leaders when they're wrong? No, it would mean when I correct the leaders of the church that I am making myself dependent on them. We are not spiritually dependent on any church leaders. We are just spiritually dependent on God. We are spiritually dependent on church leaders in the organization, in the physical things, in that which is like to be an organized body. But we are not spiritually dependent, never, ever, on a leader of the church or a human. That we must learn the difference. So one that takes out of God in trust. He will not be an enemy of the leaders. He will not oppose them. He will be just a fine person, but he will do his job as God has set it to him to do. He will not try to correct the other ones if it's not needed. There is enough correction by what we live. We never will do anything wrong if we take from God only. We will only be right if we take from God. Even though people might not be pleased with us, but we will be humble, we will be patient, we will not be irritated in all our discussions with anyone, with leaders or no leaders. We just will be like Christ. If Christ is the means by which we live, if through Christ we have access to the Father, and from the Father we take that love, that peace, that righteousness that includes everything, all our actions will be good. No matter if ones will be happy with that, what we do, or unhappy. But we must be sure that our trust is on the rock. We don't build on sand. We don't build on humans. We never want to trust humans again, because this is sin. This is where all sin come out. This is the original one. If this is not destroyed, all other things will remain. May God give us and grant us this grace that we will be overcomers, not in the battle of works, but in the battle of faith, where the real battle is done in our hearts. And that means, in whom do I trust? May God give us the victory and the ability to see ourselves when we do out of what we do. Amen.